Racist Karen listed my house for sale online, but she didn't know I owns the real estate company. In the quiet suburbs of Oakwood, where manicured lawns and picket fences paint a picture of domestic tranquility, a storm was brewing. A storm that would shake the very foundations of one family's American dream and expose the ugly underbelly of racial prejudice that still festers in our society. Picture this: you've worked tirelessly for years, climbing the corporate ladder, saving every penny. Finally, you achieve what many consider the pinnacle of success, buying your dream home in an upscale neighborhood. You're filled with hope, envisioning backyard barbecues, your children playing safely in the cul-de-sac, and friendly waves from neighbors as you collect your morning paper. But what if that dream turned into a nightmare? What if the color of your skin made you a target in your own home? What if someone decided that you didn't belong and took matters into their own hands, going so far as to list your house for sale without your knowledge or consent? This isn't the plot of a Hollywood thriller. This is the real-life story of the Jenkins family and the shocking events that unfolded in the summer of 2024. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comment section, and if you are a lover of justice and inspirational stories, don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more of these gripping stories. I'm DeMichael Jenkins, and this is my story. A tale of how one woman's racism escalated from snide remarks to an audacious act of fraud that would test the limits of my patience, challenge the bonds of my community, and ultimately, force us all to confront the insidious nature of prejudice that still lurks beneath the surface of our society. As we embark on this journey together, I invite you to ask yourself, what would you do if your safe haven became a battleground? How far would you go to protect your family and your rights? And most importantly, how can we, as a society, ensure that no one ever has to face such blatant discrimination again? Brace yourselves, for this is a story that will challenge your perceptions, stir your emotions, and hopefully, inspire you to take action against injustice wherever you may find it. My name is DeMichael Jenkins. At 35, I've achieved what many would consider the American dream. After years of hard work, I've become a successful real estate developer with a portfolio of properties that would make my younger self proud. But it wasn't just professional success I was after. Like many, I dreamed of a place to call home, a sanctuary where I could build a life with my wife, Keisha. In the spring of 2023, that dream seemed to materialize in the form of a beautiful colonial-style house in the prestigious Oakwood Estates. As we drove through the tree-lined streets, past immaculate lawns and children playing freely, Keisha squeezed my hand. "This is it," she whispered, her eyes shining with hope. I felt it too. This was where we belonged. The day we moved in was filled with optimism. We were greeted by some neighbors, mostly with smiles and welcome baskets. But there was one face that stood out, not for its warmth, but for its thinly veiled disdain. That face belonged to Karen Thompson, our next-door neighbor. Karen was in her late 50s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a perpetual look of disapproval. From the moment she laid eyes on us, it was clear she had decided we didn't belong. Her first words weren't welcome or hello, but a curt "You must be the new owners." The pause before owners was brief but loaded with meaning. At first, we tried to brush off Karen's behavior as simple unfriendliness. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that her actions were motivated by something far more insidious: racism. It started with small things. Karen would pointedly lock her car doors when we walked past. She'd clutch her purse tighter if we shared an elevator. But soon, her behavior escalated. She began questioning our presence in common areas, asking if we were visiting someone in our own building. Then came the noise complaints. Anytime we had friends over, even for a quiet dinner, Karen would call the building management or the police, claiming we were having wild parties. We later learned she described these gatherings as gang-related activities to other neighbors. The situation reached a boiling point one Saturday afternoon. I was in our backyard, grilling for a small family gathering. Karen stormed over, her face red with anger. "This isn't Section 8 housing," she spat. "You people need to learn to behave in a civilized neighborhood." I was stunned into silence. Keisha, overhearing the commotion, came outside. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Karen turned to her, a fake smile plastered on her face. "Oh, I was just explaining to your husband that this neighborhood has certain standards. We wouldn't want to bring down property values, would we?" The implication was clear. Our mere presence, in Karen's eyes, was devaluing the neighborhood. As Karen strutted away, I felt a mix of anger, shame, and helplessness wash over me. Here I was, a successful professional, being treated like a criminal in my own home. I looked at Keisha, saw the hurt in her eyes, and knew we had a decision to make. Do we fight back, or do we let Karen's racism drive us from our dream home? The constant stress began to take its toll. Keisha, usually vibrant and outgoing, became withdrawn. She'd jump at every knock on the door, fearing another confrontation. I found myself losing sleep, constantly on edge, wondering what Karen's next move would be. Our son, Marcus, just 7 years old, started asking questions we weren't prepared to answer. "Dad, why does the lady next door hate us?" he asked one night, his innocent eyes filled with confusion. How do you explain racism to a child who sees the world with such purity? As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in our home changed. What should have been a place of comfort and safety had become a battleground. We found ourselves whispering in our own living room, afraid that normal conversation would trigger another complaint. The simple act of coming home from work filled me with dread, wondering what new accusation or insult awaited us. But amidst this darkness, there were glimmers of hope. Not all our neighbors shared Karen's views. The Johnsons, an elderly couple across the street, often invited us for tea. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 doors down would bring over homemade tamales, her way of saying we were welcome. These small acts of kindness reminded us that not everyone saw us as outsiders. Yet, Karen's influence was pervasive. We noticed some neighbors who had initially been friendly started to avoid us. Invitations to block parties mysteriously stopped arriving. It felt like we were being slowly but surely isolated in our own community. One evening, as Keisha and I sat on our porch, watching the sunset and trying to find a moment of peace, we had to confront the question that had been hanging over us. How long could we endure this? Was our dream home worth the constant battle against prejudice and hostility? Little did we know, Karen was about to escalate her campaign against us in a way we could never have imagined. An act so brazen, so outrageously discriminatory, that it would force us to take a stand not just for ourselves, but for anyone who has ever faced housing discrimination. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our once peaceful street, we couldn't have known that the real battle was just beginning. A battle that would test our resolve, challenge our faith in justice, and ultimately redefine what it means to truly belong. How would you react if you were in our shoes, facing daily discrimination in your own neighborhood? Would you fight back, or would the pressure force you to give up your dream home? It was a crisp autumn morning when our world turned upside down. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through real estate listings out of professional habit, when something caught my eye. A familiar facade. Our facade. Our house was listed for sale. At first, I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things. But there it was, clear as day, 1542, Oakwood Drive, listed for $750,000. My heart raced as I scrolled through the photos. Our living room, our kitchen, even our bedroom all on display for the world to see. Photos that could only have been taken during the neighborhood potluck we'd hosted just weeks ago, in a naive attempt to bridge the divide with our neighbors. "Keisha!" I called out, my voice cracking. She rushed in, still in her robe, alarm evident on her face. As I showed her the listing, her expression morphed from confusion to horror to anger. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her hand trembling as she took the tablet from me. We're not selling our home." As the initial shock wore off, a sickening realization dawned on me. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. And I knew exactly who was behind it. The next few hours were a blur of frantic phone calls. I reached out to every real estate agency in the area, demanding they take down the fraudulent listing. Most were sympathetic, but the damage was already done. The listing had been shared across multiple platforms, and interested buyers were already calling. As evening fell, I found myself standing on Karen's porch, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. When she opened the door, her face showed no surprise, only a smug satisfaction that made my blood boil. "Karen," I began, fighting to keep my voice steady, "I know you're behind the listing. Why are you doing this?" Her response was chilling in its casualness. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. But then her mask slipped, and her true colors showed. "But even if I did, you don't belong here. And there's nothing you can do about it." As she moved to close the door, I placed my foot in the jam, desperation overriding my better judgment. "Karen, please. We're just trying to live our lives. We're your neighbors. Why can't you accept that?" Her eyes narrowed, all pretense of civility gone. "Neighbors?" she spat. "You're not neighbors. You're invaders. This is our community, and we don't need your kind here bringing down property values and causing trouble." The door slammed in my face, leaving me stunned on the porch. As I walked back home, my mind raced. How had it come to this? How could someone harbor so much hatred? That night, as Keisha and I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of the fraudulent listing and legal documents, we knew we had a choice to make. We could either let Karen's racism drive us from our home, or we could stand and fight. "We're not going anywhere," Keisha said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "This is our home. We've done nothing wrong. We have to fight this." I nodded, feeling a surge of love and pride for my wife's strength. "You're right. But if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. We need evidence." And so began our campaign to document every interaction, every slight, every act of discrimination. I installed security cameras around our property, capturing Karen's frequent drive-bys and her attempts to intimidate us. We saved every email, every text message, every voicemail from neighbors warning us about Karen's latest rumors. We reached out to sympathetic neighbors, those who had witnessed Karen's behavior firsthand. The Johnsons, bless their hearts, provided a detailed statement about Karen's comments at the last HOA meeting, where she'd suggested implementing stricter background checks for new residents, a thinly veiled attempt to keep more families like ours out. Mrs. Rodriguez shared recordings of Karen trying to rally support for her campaign against us, using coded language about maintaining the character of the neighborhood. As our evidence mounted, we knew we needed professional help. I reached out to the local chapter of the NAACP, explaining our situation. They were outraged and immediately put us in touch with a civil rights attorney specializing in housing discrimination. Melissa Goldstein, our attorney, listened to our story with a mix of sympathy and determination. "What you're experiencing is textbook housing discrimination," she explained. "It's illegal, it's reprehensible, and we're going to fight it with everything we've got." She helped us file complaints with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the local Fair Housing Agency. We also began the process of filing a civil lawsuit against Karen for harassment and discrimination. But even as we took these legal steps, the emotional toll continued to mount. Marcus came home from school one day in tears, telling us that some kids had said we were criminals because they'd seen our house listed for sale by the police. Karen's lies were spreading, infecting even the innocent minds of children. Keisha and I found ourselves constantly on edge, jumping at every car door slam, every raised voice in the street. Was it another confrontation? Another act of aggression? The stress began to affect our health. Keisha developed migraines, while I found myself battling insomnia. Yet, amidst this turmoil, we found unexpected allies. A group of neighbors, led by the Johnsons and Mrs. Rodriguez, formed a support committee. They organized a neighborhood watch to deter any potential vandalism and started a social media campaign to counter the negative rumors Karen was spreading. One evening, as we sat on our porch, feeling the weight of our battle, Mr. Johnson walked over with a petition in his hand. "We've had enough of Karen's behavior," he said, his voice firm despite his advanced age. "Most of us moved here for the diversity, for the community. We won't let her destroy that. The petition, calling for Karen's removal from the HOA board and a formal apology to our family, had signatures from over 70% of the neighborhood. It was a moment of hope in what had been a dark time. As weeks turned into months, our case gained attention. Local news stations picked up the story, shining a light on the ongoing issue of housing discrimination. Civil rights organizations rallied around us, organizing protests and awareness campaigns. Karen, feeling the pressure, began to show cracks in her facade. We'd often see her peeking through her curtains, scowling at the reporters camped out on our street. Her once loyal group of supporters dwindled as more neighbors learned the truth about her actions. But just as we thought we were making progress, Karen made her most audacious move yet. One that would force us into a direct confrontation and test the limits of our resolve. Have you ever experienced or witnessed housing discrimination? How did it make you feel, and what do you think is the best way to combat such deeply ingrained prejudices in our communities? The day we decided to take legal action was both terrifying and exhilarating. With the mountain of evidence we had gathered, we approached Melissa Goldstein, a prominent civil rights lawyer known for her work in housing discrimination cases. As we laid out our story, I could see the fire in her eyes. "This is exactly why we have fair housing laws," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "What Karen has done isn't just morally reprehensible, it's illegal." With Melissa's guidance, we filed formal complaints with the local real estate board, the police department, and the Fair Housing Authority. The process was grueling, requiring us to relive every painful moment of discrimination we had endured. But with each filing, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. We were no longer silent victims, we were fighting back. As news of our legal action spread through Oakwood Estates, something unexpected happened. Neighbors we had barely spoken to began reaching out, offering their support. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman from across the street, came to our door with a homemade pie and tears in her eyes. "I had no idea," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. This isn't what our community stands for." One by one, more neighbors joined our cause. Tom and Sarah, a young couple who had just moved in down the block, organized a community meeting to discuss racism and inclusivity. The Rodriguezes started a neighborhood watch program, not to police us as Karen had done, but to ensure everyone felt safe and welcome. Even some of Karen's former allies began to distance themselves from her. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that her actions against us weren't isolated incidents. Former residents came forward with their own stories of discrimination, painting a picture of a long-standing pattern of behavior. The day Karen was asked to step down from her position on the Homeowners Association board was a turning point. I'll never forget the look on her face as she stormed out of the community center, her carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbling around her. It wasn't jubilation I felt, but a somber sense of justice being served. The legal consequences for Karen's actions were severe. Not only was she fined for the fraudulent listing of our home, but she also faced criminal charges for harassment and discrimination. The real estate agency that had unknowingly been complicit in her scheme faced its own investigation and was required to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all its agents. As our case gained attention, it sparked a broader conversation about housing discrimination in seemingly progressive communities. Local news outlets ran stories about the subtle ways racism persists in neighborhoods like ours, hidden behind polite smiles and manicured lawns. Civil rights organizations used our experience as a case study in their training materials, teaching others how to recognize and combat housing discrimination. For me, the most profound change was internal. Through this ordeal, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned the importance of standing up not just for myself, but for all those who face discrimination. The power of community in fighting injustice became clear to me in a way it never had before. Keisha and I became active in local fair housing initiatives, sharing our story at community events and schools. We wanted to ensure that what happened to us would never happen to another family. Marcus, our son, watched all of this unfold with wide eyes. One evening, as we sat on our porch, the same porch where we had once felt like outsiders in our own home, he turned to me and said, "Dad, I'm proud of you and Mom. You made our neighborhood better for everyone." Those words meant more to me than any legal victory ever could. We had not only secured our place in this community, but had also paved the way for others to feel welcome and valued. As I reflect on our journey, I'm reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Our story is just one small bend in that arc, but it's a bend nonetheless. And it's a reminder that change is possible, even in the face of deeply entrenched prejudice. The fight against housing discrimination is far from over. But with each voice that speaks out, with each community that stands together, we move closer to a world where everyone can find a place to call home, regardless of the color of their skin. What can we all do in our daily lives to combat racism and promote inclusivity in our neighborhoods? As we come to the end of this journey, I want to leave you with more than just a story. I want to leave you with a call to action, a challenge to each and every one of you watching. Our experience in Oakwood Estates wasn't just about one racist neighbor or one family's struggle. It's a microcosm of a larger issue that persists in our society. Housing discrimination may not always be as blatant as what we faced, but it exists in subtle forms across our nation. It's in the realtor who steers certain families away from particular neighborhoods. It's in the mortgage lender who offers less favorable terms based on a person's race. It's in the neighbor who makes newcomers feel unwelcome because they don't fit in. So, what can we do? How can we, as individuals, make a difference? First and foremost, educate yourselves. Learn about fair housing laws. Understand what constitutes discrimination. Knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better equipped we are to recognize and combat injustice. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. But laws are only as strong as their enforcement. That's where we come in. If you witness or experience housing discrimination, report it. Contact your local fair housing agency or the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. By speaking up, you're not just standing up for yourself, but for everyone who might face similar discrimination in the future. But beyond legal action, we need to actively work to make our communities more inclusive. This starts with self-reflection. Examine your own biases. We all have them, often unconscious. The key is recognizing them and actively working to overcome them. Reach out to your neighbors, especially those who might be different from you. Organize community events that celebrate diversity. Support local initiatives that promote inclusivity. Be the change you want to see in your neighborhood. For those in positions of power, real estate agents, landlords, community leaders, I implore you to take a stand against discrimination. Implement fair housing practices. Provide training to your staff. Create policies that promote diversity and inclusion. To the allies out there, don't underestimate the power of your support. When you see injustice, speak up. Stand with those who are marginalized. Your voice can make a difference. Parents, teach your children about diversity and inclusion from an early age. Help them understand that a person's worth isn't determined by the color of their skin, their religion, or their background. Remember, creating inclusive communities isn't just about being nice. It's about creating spaces where everyone can thrive, where diversity is seen as a strength rather than a threat. It's about recognizing that when we lift up the most vulnerable among us, we all rise. As for me and my family, our journey didn't end with the resolution of our case. It was just the beginning. We've committed ourselves to being advocates for fair housing. We speak at schools, community centers, and real estate conferences, sharing our story and educating others about housing discrimination. We've seen firsthand how a community can transform when people come together to stand against injustice. Oakwood Estates today is a different place than it was when we first moved in. It's not perfect, no place is, but it's a community that's actively working towards inclusivity and understanding. Our experience was painful, yes. There were moments when we wanted to give up, to walk away from our dream home. But ultimately, it strengthened our resolve. It showed us the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It taught us that change is possible, but it requires courage, persistence, and the support of a community. So I leave you with this thought: silence in the face of injustice only serves to perpetuate it. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Together, we can create communities where everyone feels welcome, valued, and at home. The journey towards true equality and inclusion is long, and we still have a way to go. But every step counts. Every voice raised against discrimination makes a difference. Every act of kindness and inclusion brings us closer to the world we want to see. So I ask you, what will you do today to make your community more inclusive? How will you use your voice to stand against discrimination? The power to change our world lies in our hands. Let's use it wisely. Thank you for listening to our story. Remember, home isn't just a place. It's a right. And it's a right worth fighting for. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more of this gripping story.